And working with me as demo goddess, essentially, is Karen, who will be looking at some of the apps that I'll be talking about. She works for Core, and she's an iTunes U guru, runs professional development. She's very interested in special needs education, working with the deaf. She's actually produced a number of commercially available e-books as well for children in language learning, Afrikaans, etc. So some great skill sets here locally. As Chris said, what my goal is to get a flavour of the different ways iPads are being used. And I can't cover every academic discipline, but I'd like to get an idea where you're from. So I'm not going to go round the room as I do with a small group, but can I have a show of hands for those in the physical sciences and engineering? If that's your turf, okay. Humanities and arts, maybe creative arts as well. Good, good, good. Health sciences? All right. All right. Bio sciences. Education. I'm running out of different academic disciplines. Let's just leave it there. So I'm getting a bit of everything. The good news, business studies? Anyone in business studies? Cool. I'm going to cover all of those off. And it's interesting to see that the successful projects with iPad, it's a matter of integrating the iPad appropriately. People are integrating the iPad into their lives, as I think this video shows. And I expect all of you to be able to use all of the apps we saw there by the end of it. No, but seriously, this session, just to set expectations, is not an iPad 101. If you're here to work out how to turn it on, or perhaps how to get an app, that's not what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be looking at the big picture to hopefully get a few synapses going on what others are doing, and I know there's a lot happening here as well. You know, that video, when I looked at it again last night, I realised these academic disciplines were represented. So just about everyone in this room could probably relate to some of the ways those iPads were used. I'm going to go through a hell of a lot in 90 minutes, so this is a URL where I've put up a very basic website, but don't worry, it's at the end of the talk as well, and it refers to the primary resources, some of the videos, a lot of the literature that I'll be discussing. So at the end, I will whack this up as well, but let's just get straight into it, because there's so much to dive into. This is the agenda, essentially. I'm going to be talking about mobile learning. That's what it's all about. I'm going to look at content. But before I do, think about content not just about acquiring it, but creating content. Where I've seen real success, and educators will reinforce this, that when students create content, they're much more engaged in the learning process, and I'll look at some of the primary research around that area. So it's really about the content, the creation of content, as well as access of content, and putting all of that into context, social networking and so on. So mobile learning. let's get into it. I don't think we have to go much further than WSU here in South Africa, and Tambo and colleagues defined mobile learning, I think, more than adequately, anytime, any place being the bottom line. But I think a lot of people make a big mistake, and I've seen this over and over again at tertiary institutions. They think it's all about the technology. Di Laurillard was professor at Open University, indeed Provost Chancellor of Technology for many years. Anyone in the e-learning space will know her. She's visited Joburg a number of times to talk about e-learning. In her book, Teaching as a Design Science in 2013, she made this very strong comment: if you put technology first, learning is going to come second. So to me, it's all about the teacher. And I think we can actually refer to a local lad, Trevor Noah, here in Joburg, when he looks at it in a different light.
$50 million she spent. Most expensive school in Africa. Most expensive anything. $50 million. That's what she spends. It's got state-of-the-art computers, state-of-the-art facilities, and cars, and all this equipment. State-of-the-art everything. Not everything. Teachers, not so much.
It really is about the teaching. And in fact, there's a good body of evidence to support that. Professor John Hattie is Professor of Education at the Grad School of Ed at the University of Melbourne. When he was at Auckland University, he released a text called Visible Learning. It was a meta-analysis of over 800 papers on student achievement. And he created what he calls the barometer of effectiveness, looking at different pedagogies. He found, for example, that distance education on its own, apologies to anyone from Uni of South Africa, has very low efficacy. It's face-to-face. It's blended learning. He did find technology can enhance the learning experience when balanced with good teaching. It's all about the teaching. And certainly colleagues in Zimbabwe would agree with that.
But the complicated, for me, the hardest part is actually not teaching people how to use technology, but how to be creative with technology to enhance their teaching. And I think that is the hardest thing. And that's not a skill, really. It's less of a skill. It's more of that can be taught. It's more of an intrinsic. Inspired teachers will inspire children with a blackboard or with technology.
And it's interesting, a conference in higher ed is referring to children. You guys aren't teaching children. Now, another mistake people make in university strategy is they believe that technology is the strategy. We have someone from business. Well, our friend Michael Porter is professor at Harvard Business School, and in the New York Times last year, he commented that big risk is many folks think the technology is the strategy. Not so. Again, it's all about the teaching. Now, having said it's not about the technology, let me talk about technology. There are a couple of reports that look at educational technology in universities and where it's headed. In fact, the Horizon reports from the New Media Consortium in the US have been doing that for well over a decade. They use a Delphi research methodology where 40 plus scholars in the area get together, review the literature, narrow it down and look at the horizon a year out, 2 years out, the trends that are occurring. Now, apologies for the Australasian bias, it's obvious why from the introduction, but in the Aussie report in 2013, here are the key factors a year out. They thought learning or analytics, massively online open courses or MOOCs, mobile learning, and social media. Last year's report, however, changed, and the two bottom items dropped off. They now talk about flipped classroom. I think that's an area that's been highly over-intellectualized. In fact, many would argue that the Socratic method from, I think, 360 BCE is what we're really talking about here, where it's a matter of firing off an idea with discussions, perhaps educationally enhanced, triggers, active learning, deliberate learning. Flipped classroom means giving them access to materials before they're in front of you. That's essentially it. Now, I was a bit concerned about the fact that dropping off that was mobile learning, but when I read a report from Charles Sturt University, it became obvious why. They point out that mobile learning is here and now. It's not a nice to have. And I think that's a reality when I look at some of the figures from ownership of mobile phones here on the African continent. In fact, it's only Ivory Coast that surpasses South Africa in ownership of mobile phones and other mobile devices, quite high. Now, these are typically not smartphones. Smartphones being devices that operate an operating system. or tablets like the iPad. The iPad is iOS, as is the iPhone, and then there's Android. Now, there is a good body of research on how smartphones are being used. They might be commerce master's degrees from University of Zululand. They might be a paper that was recently put out from Western Cape University on smartphone use around uni students. And it might be glossy marketing reports that I've come across. It's interesting to look at the historical changes with educational technology. There are folks who spend their whole life doing this. They track educational technology from the work of Turing with cryptology in World War II through to mini computers like these in the basement of UC Berkeley in 1964, through to personal computers in the 80s and then 90s. And many are calling this era that we're in now the post-PC world. Now, that's not to say computers have lost their relevance. My iPad does not replace my notebook. It enhances. It's an extra device. So 51 years ago, basement of a university. Sadly, some university basements look very similar. They have staff who are very similar, who are locked away in dark rooms with pizzas being slipped under the doors so they don't go out there and meet real clients. Interestingly, the free speech movement was happening outside that window at that very moment in '64. And I always like to have a little bit of relevant or irrelevant tales around the issues I talk about. The chap who was the Vice-Chancellor was Clark Kerr. Professor Kerr was an economist. And this, I think, really shows how we shouldn't stereotype, because the guy had a great sense of humour. In fact, when he supported free speech, the incoming governor of California, Ronald Reagan, need I say more, dismissed him. Kerr left his job saying, "I leave as I came, fired with enthusiasm." He's a great guy. And he's also given perhaps the most accurate definition of a university that I've ever come across. Maybe yours isn't as much of a fiefdom as the university I worked in was, but he described universities as a series of diverse organisational and entities and individuals only held together by a common grievance over parking. There is something to be said about that. I'd like us to actually do something now. I'm going to get an idea of Johannesburg academics' use of computers. This is an example of some large group teaching I've seen in various universities where polls have been used. Now, I've spent the last 3 days at Joburg Uni and collected some data that will be part of this little survey I'm taking, but I'd like to actually get some data from you as well. Now, there are a number of applications and solutions out there that I've seen academics use for running in-class surveys and polls. They range from web-based solutions such as Go Soapbox that a number of folks are using, to apps like Turning Point from Responseware, or Nearpod, which is very, very cool indeed for small group learning, and I strongly recommend that you play with that. But I'm going to stay platform agnostic and use a web-based tool. So what I'd like you to do, yes, I'm going to get you to do something, is to grab the iPad that you were given, if you're comfortable doing so, I'm not going to twist your arm, and go to this website. Now, those who've never used an iPad, you'll struggle, you won't know where Safari is. Those of you who are comfortable, let's do it. An important message here is, let's not be afraid of failure. Let's give it a go.
It's a web-based access. You've got to get on our Wi-Fi.
Here it comes.
But I'm saying for other people that don't have. The Wi-Fi is the call guest network, and the password is welcome TO call exclamation mark.
Most should be there. I'm going to give you a second to do that, and just to assist you in your concentration to get the synapses going, I'll put a bit of music on in a minute. Now, I can see some folks are there already. What I'd like you to do, without any explanation, is do the poll in front of you, please. A little bit of background music to help those synapses. I'll swap that now. If you haven't done your yoga this morning, feel free to come down for downward dog or salute to the sun. And Ravi Shankar can leave us now because perhaps we won't be able to concentrate. I'm going to, on the screen, ignore what's going on. Karen's going to jump to the teacher's machine, which is a web-based solution where she will have a look at the feedback that you're sending. To do that, she's going to use wireless projection, but we'll talk about all of that later. So she's got the website up. I've already collected 59 responses in the last couple of days. And already 10 of you have finished the poll. I can tell by having a look how many of you have finished the poll. So that's good. That's a third of you have finished the poll. Great stuff. No rush, no performance anxiety required. Let's give it a go. We're now up to 66, 7, or 12 extra people. Hey, that's good. You guys are doing very well. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to annoy the hell out of those people who are still doing it. If I were in class, I would obviously put aside appropriate time. All this is an illustration of what I've seen your colleagues do. But there is a meaning to it. So, class dismissed, flip that iPad over. I'm now going to look at some of the research. We've had 9 people respond. Okay, so here's the data that we've collected the last few days. Incidentally, another thing I've learned in the 4 days I've been in South Africa is always have a backup. Monday, somebody stole a power cable from a substation. We lost the network. So today I present to you backup solution 1.01, the butcher paper. I'm going to actually record some of these stats because I'm going to compare you to international cohort of students. So ownership of smartphones from Johannesburg academics is at 91%. Phone. Tablet ownership of academics at 35%. I'm assuming they'll mostly be iPads. Social networking, 21%. And who logs into Facebook more than once a day? 72% Facebook. That tells me that 72% of academics in South Africa don't have enough things to do. But anyway, back to the machine. My machine. Let's compare you to the largest group of undergraduate students internationally, which is the ECAR study. Now, the ECAR study, N equals 75,000 students last year. 2013 and 12 were actually only North American students. 2014 includes some from South Africa, so it's more of an international flavour. Let's see how we pan out compared. So smartphone ownership last year was at 70%. You guys were at 91. So that just shows a student versus academic difference and geographical difference. Tablet ownership in North America and elsewhere at close to 50%, 35% here in Johannesburg. So that gives me a bit of an idea of where we're at. Social networking, well, for that I'm going to actually change to some research from our friends at the University of Auckland. They measured wired and wireless traffic on their network at the end of 2013 to get an idea of what folks were doing. And basically they found social networking was about 20%. That's actually about the same as this cohort and colleagues from Johannesburg University. Facebook use, 72%. They didn't measure that, but I've actually seen a poll from med students at the University of Tasmania where it was closer to 85%. So it gives you an idea of just how comfortable. In fact, last week I came across this report of English high school students. How much time are they spending online? A day a week. Now that tells me a couple of things. It tells me that cats have really picked up their act in the last decade, because I'm sure they're looking at YouTube videos of cats. It's also shown me that they've really got a bit of an issue socially. In fact, when you see them in action checking every damn minute, it's kind of like somebody at home opening the front door expecting someone to be there. But that's how they're behaving. Now, I'm not going to get into the social issues with that much online activity, But I will make a comment that a colleague from Oxford University made recently. Dave White said that too many of us are assuming just because they're online a lot and they get technology, that they know how to use technology in teaching and learning. Dave doesn't agree.